All right, so we're on the very back to do a couple more factorings where a is not 1. So 2x squared minus 13x minus 7 equals 0. So the first thing we look for is GCF. Do we have one? No, we do not. Okay, so a is not 1 and a is going to remain to be not 1. So what do I multiply together? 7 and what? 2. Okay, thank you. I don't know where the 4 was coming from. Yeah, 2 times negative 7. That gives me a negative 14. So I am looking for two numbers that multiply to give me 14, negative 14, which means the signs are opposite. So multiply to give me 14 and subtract to give me a negative 13. What do you think that would be? 1 and negative 14. Okay, so I'm going to split this middle term then and get 2x squared minus 14x plus x minus 7 equals 0. And remember, when you do that, you double check that these two things are going to add back to give you this. And they do. Okay? Everybody okay with where that came from? Take your earbud out for me. So then I'm going to factor by grouping. So I'm going to group these two together and these two together. Out of these two, what can I factor out? 2x. Okay, that leaves me with x minus 7. Now out of these two, I don't have a GCF. And so normally we would say, well, we can't factor anything out. But in order to do this, you have to factor something out. So that would be a positive 1. And then that leaves me with x minus 7. And then remember that whatever you have in parentheses, they have to match. They do match. You are not finished factoring. You then take this 2x plus 1, and you're going to multiply it by x minus 7, and that would equal 0. And this is why I didn't want to put that horizontal line there first, because you probably have more room than I don't. So instead of me cramming it in there, I can control that. We'll just move that. All right. And this is one where if you want to write them out, you can. You don't necessarily have to. But my x values, I'm going to get x equals, and this is a set. What would this give me? Negative 1/2, and this would give me 7. Those are my two answers. Okay, everybody okay with that? Any questions at all about where anything came from? Because factoring is huge. Like if you can't factor, that's a problem. Ask me a question. You should be least to greatest. Honestly, I don't know if that's an official math rule or not. I do know if it's ever given to you, it should be that way. And I do know that some teachers have their own preferences on that. So who knows what your future professors may say, but it doesn't really matter. So we're just going to practice doing it that way in case you have somebody that's hardcore about it. Okay, good question. Anything else? All right, so here's the next one. We'll do 4x squared minus 13x plus 9 equals 0. So what am I going to multiply together? 4 and 9, okay? So I'm going to multiply 4 times 9. That gives me what? 36. Okay. So I need two numbers that multiply to give me 36 and add to give me negative 13. Now when you're doing this, think about it this way. They have to multiply to give you a positive 36. So if this is negative, that means both numbers are negative. Okay? And what would those two numbers be? Negative 9 and negative 4. Good. All right, so we're going to do 4x squared minus 9x minus 4x plus 9 equals 0. Now, does it matter if I do 9x first and then 4x or the other way around? Doesn't matter either way. We just want to make sure that these two always combine back to give me that. If not, then we can't move forward. So then we are going to factor by grouping. Out of these two, what's my GCF? X. That's it. So I can factor out an x. Leaves me with 4x minus 9. Now out of these two, I can't factor out an x, can't factor out a number, But if you have a negative, the negative has to be factored out. So I would have to factor out a -1, and then that leaves me with 4x minus 9. Then my two sets of parentheses actually match. Okay, everybody okay with that? Then I get x minus 1 times 4x minus 9, and that equals 0. Then come up with your answers. Are your answers both positive, both negative, one of each? What is it? Both positive, right? So you'd have 1, and what's the other one? 9/4, exactly. What questions do you have? We all good? All right. Well, okay. So then we're going to do -6x squared minus 14x equals 4. So what is the first thing I need to do? Y. I need to equal it to 0. So I need to equal it to 0. Yes, I could subtract 4 from both sides, but then I would have to deal with this. So you want your x squared term or your leading term to be positive always. Now I could move the 4 over and then I could multiply through by a -1, or I could just move everything to the right instead, right? So always make sure you're thinking about, I need to set it equal to 0, and which side would be most helpful to me. And in this case, I think moving everything to the right would be the most helpful. So we'd have 0 equals 6x squared plus 14x plus 4. That makes sense? How to make that decision? Multiply through by -1? You could. Yeah, you could do that. Yeah, you could do that too. I think it's, yeah, you could take out the GCF, but you're not always going to have a GCF, first of all. And second of all, I just think if you are able to easily avoid negatives, then I would suggest you do that, just because that's where our careless mistakes happen sometimes, just because it's so easy to mess that stuff up. So then the next thing we look for is what? GCF. So I factor out my GCF. What's my GCF? 2. So 0 equals 2 times 3x squared plus 7x plus 2. Now, could I have factored by grouping without doing the GCF? Yes, and then you can do the GCF at the end, but it definitely makes it easier if you do it right here. All right, so now I'm going to factor by grouping, but I have this out here. Now, if you are just trying to solve it and you accidentally drop off the 2 or you deliberately drop off the 2, that is fine. If you are trying to completely factor it, and those are your instructions, you absolutely cannot drop off the 2 because it changes the function. You with me? So we're just going to do good work here, which means we're not dropping off the 2. If we did, in this particular question, would not affect your answer in the end. But if you were factoring so that you could graph or something, totally affects your function. So we're just going to leave that 2 there. He's just along for the ride. So I'm still going to multiply 3 times 2 because a is not 1, and I get 6. Two numbers that multiply to give me 6, combine to give me 7. 1 and 6. So then I leave this here. I get 0 equals 2 times, and then 3x squared plus x plus 6x plus 2. Now, again, could you have done it in a different order? Absolutely. Then we're going to group. Now, because this is going to have so many parentheses in it, because I need the parentheses for this 2 out here, I'm going to add some brackets in there. 2, and then basically what are parentheses right now, I'm going to make into brackets so that I can do my parenthesis thing here. Out of these 2, what do I factor out? X, and that leaves me, so just leave me with 3x. That's it. Plus 1. Don't forget the plus 1. Those are some weird things that I see. You still had two terms. Out of these two, what can I factor out? 2, so plus 2. And then that leaves me with 3x plus 1. And then I've got those brackets there. Now, could those brackets be parentheses? Absolutely. But then when you get a ton of parentheses, it just kind of gets overwhelming sometimes. So I'm just trying to show you different ways to kind of handle that. But I only need the brackets for that one step, because now I will have 0 equals 2 times, and then I'll get this x plus 2 and 3x plus 1. Now that is completely factored. If I dropped off the 2 and I multiplied this back together, I would not get this back. But if I multiply all that together, then I would be back where I started from, which is one of the things you want to be able to show at any time. And again, even if it doesn't matter for the question, could be that somebody is saying, you still got to show me all that. So we want to make sure we can do it right. And then x equals, now this guy does not have an x on him. If he did, then that would give me a 0 of 0, right? But he doesn't, so again, he's just there hanging on for the ride. I only have 2 x's, so I only have 2 zeros, and that would be -2 and -1/3. Okay. What questions do you have about that? All right. Then I'm going to give you one more, and I'm going to give you a minute to work on that. You can definitely talk to each other about it if you need to. 3x squared minus 14x equals -8. Okay, so factor and solve that one. First thing you have to do to set it equal to 0, honey. So you're going to move that over. Okay. Add 8 to both sides. There you go. So once I get my 24, my next thought is I need two numbers that have the same sign that multiply to give me 24, combine to give me -14. So I think that's -12 and -2. Would you agree with that? That's what I would use. And again, if you put them in a different order right here, we would have, some of our work would look a little bit different past this step, like if you put 2 first and then 12 second, but we'll get the same answer in the end. And let's see, group these. Oh, should have said I'm supposed to look for a GCF, but there wasn't one. So out of here, I can take out a 3x. That leaves me with x minus 4. You have to factor out the negative there, so that's a -2. You get x minus 4. Then 3x minus 2 times x minus 4. That is factored completely, okay? And like if it's not an equation and it just says to factor it, boom, that's all you can do if you don't have an equals 0. If you have an equals 0, we can actually solve it, and we get that x is equal to 2/3 and 4. Okay. What questions do you have? Can we factor? Yes? Okay, because that is a very important skill. I can tell you without even looking at anything in college algebra, you got to be able to factor, because there's so many things that you do that factoring is a part of it. It's not like just, you know, you're going to be tested over factoring all the time or anything, but there's a lot of factoring going on there. All right, what questions do we have? Anything? All right, so let's go back to where we were with, I believe, square roots was what we were working on. Yes, square roots. So remember that your first, the first thing that you should recognize is that that your function is a quadratic. Then if you want to solve it, most of the time we're setting it equal to 0. If we do not have a bx term, we can set it equal to 0 and we can hope for difference of squares, or we can move the constant over to the right and then go from there. So that's what this part is reviewing. So we're going to, do we add or subtract the 60 from both sides? Subtract. So I get 2x squared, and then negative 228 minus 60 is going to give me a negative what? $288. Good. Do I want to take the square root right now? No, I do not. I do not want to take the square root right now. I want to do what? Divide. Good. Divide both sides by 2. So when I divide both sides by 2, I get x squared equals negative 144. Then I'm going to take the square root of both sides. Is 144 a perfect square? Yes. Okay, so I get x equals, what do I have to write first? Plus or minus? What's the square root of positive 144? 12. But since it's negative, what goes after this? I. And that is your answer. Okay. And then there is a reason that we're doing so many more. Trust me on that. So we are going to look at 17 now. Now that I have this, I really think this one would actually be better as a difference of squares, but we're going to do it this way. So I want to leave my x squared, which means I need to divide both sides by 25, right? And when I do that, it's no big deal. It's x squared equals negative 4 divided by 25. It's the best I can do, right? Then I'm going to take the square root of both sides. So what do you know your answer is going to have on it? An I, exactly. So I get x equals. Now we're having to take a square root of a fraction, and it's a negative. It doesn't make it any more difficult. You can go ahead and write, all right, well, I know I'm going to have plus or minus something that's going to have an I on it. All right, there you go. You got something done, right? Taking the square root of a fraction is no more difficult than taking the square root of anything else. All you do is you take the square root of the numerator and you take the square root of the denominator. What's the square root of 4? 2. What's the square root of 25? 5. So it's plus or minus 2/5 I. That's all it is. Everybody okay with that? Yes? All right. So then we're going to move to 17. So I get 9x squared equals 1. So what does x squared equal? 1/9. Then what I'm going to do? Square root? Is my answer going to have an I on it? No. But it is going to have a what? Plus or minus, and a fraction, yes. Plus or minus. And then what is the square root of 1/9? 1/3, because the square root of 1 is 1, square root of 9 is 3. And that's it. Yay. Okay. Everybody good so far? All right. Then we'll just go ahead and do 19 together. So I've said I want my x squared term, I really want it to be positive, but I'm going to divide that away anyway, so it really doesn't matter. I don't have to move things around. I do have to move the 20 first before I can do anything. So this will give me negative 49x squared equals, what's 36 minus 20? 16. So x squared is equal to 16, or negative 16 over 49. And that negative, that can go out in front, or it can go on the 16, or it can go on the 49, but it doesn't go on both. Like, you can do whatever. Most of the time when you see it written, you see it like out in front of the fraction bar, but for whatever reason, when we write it, we don't really write it that way. It doesn't really matter. So take the square root of both sides. X is equal to, I know I have a plus or minus. What else do I know that I have? An I. And this is a fraction. What is that fraction? 4 over 7. Don't freak out when you have a fraction, and don't freak out when you have an I. Okay? Good enough on that? All right. So what I'm going to let you do here, well, actually, I'll let y'all know we're going to stop here for today. We're going to start with completing the square tomorrow. I want you to get into Delta Math. And